Some people say the 1973 NHL amateur draft was tepid, while other people say this is probably one of the most successful ones for the Islanders and the Habs going into the late 70s, early 80s. But the incident at the Mount Royal Hotel, I call it the McDonald Affair, was full of drama. Now, the sessions were held May 15, 1973, and the first to be held on his own day apart from other league administrative events. Originally scheduled to take place in June, the draft was moved several weeks early into May, so it would not distract from the rest of the annual summer meetings. The league had learned its lesson in 72 when the draft began to overshadow the rest of the sessions. Some squads' representatives were so focused on the amateur draft that he stopped paying attention to other issues and were spending all their time in Montreal preparing for draft day. Adding to the focus on the amateur draft was the fact that teams were feeling the heat of the WHA. With the new league having already operated for a full season, NHL execs realized they would have to fight hard to sign their top picks. This was especially important in a year when the draft was considered exceptionally deep, not for some historians, and the WHA was scheduled to draft players just 3 days after the NHL. The top pick was a no-brainer because Ottawa 67 star Denis Potvin, who later won 4 Stanley Cups with the Islanders, had dominated junior hockey like no rearguard since Bobby Orr. Montreal, the most active team on draft day, was determined to get Potvin. The Canadiens repositioned themselves by trading for several extra high picks and then offered the Islanders all kind of deals for the number one choice. Islander GM Bill Torrey was not interested. However, he held on to the top pick and wisely selected Potvin, who became again the key building block for a future hockey dynasty. In the end, the NHL showed that WHA was still boss, signing all 16 of its first-round picks before the rival league could get its hands on any of them. The NHL WHA competition was great for players who were able to sign the most lucrative rookie contracts in NHL history. This included a staggering, for the time, 5-year, $600,000 contract for Toronto's Lanny McDonald, which kept the number 4 pick from signing with the WHA's team in Cleveland. Now, it was open to all amateur players born before January 1st, 52 or 4. Teams drafted in reverse order of their 73 finish. There was no set number of rounds. Teams had the right to pass in any round, and the draft continued until all teams were done selecting. LA passed in the 9th, the Rangers passed in the 10th, Toronto, St. Louis, Minnesota, Philly, Detroit, Buffalo, the Rangers, and Boston passed in the 11th round. All teams except Montreal passed in the 12th and 13th round. The rotation was the Islanders, California, Vancouver, Toronto, Atlanta, LA, Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Minnesota, Philadelphia, Detroit, Buffalo, Chicago, and the New York Rangers, Boston, and Montreal. Now, total rounds were 13, and the NHL paid a lump sum to the Canadian Amateur Hockey Association to support major junior hockey as a whole. And the team could only offer player contracts at any time after the draft. Of course, Potvin was number 1. 70 players drafted made the NHL, 41.7%. 8 players won the Stanley Cup. Most NHL games was Bob Gainey, 1,160. Most playoff contests, Potvin won 85. Highest pick to miss was number 22, the very highly regarded Peter Morin, and lowest pick to reach was the Kings' Greg Fox. Player drafted included 103 forwards, 53 defense, and 12 goalies. So I want to just do a quick look at what happened with Lanny McDonald on that draft and just gives you a better indication why he was so highly regarded. Now, the WHA draft was going to keep him in his sights no matter what was happening. Now, he was highly regarded for this. His last 2 seasons in Medicine Hat of the WCHL, he had 112 goals in 136 games. He was a WCHL All-Star First Team with Medicine Hat. Also was an All-Star prior to that in the AJHL with Lethbridge, and led the WCHL in playoff games in Medicine Hat with 18. He won the WCHL championship with Medicine Hat in 73, and of course he played on that big line with Calder Trophy winner Tom Lysiak in Medicine Hat. Now, the rumor about him thinking about the contract, Cincinnati was looking at all type of ways to draft what they call younger players, and McDonald at the time was considered probably the best young prospect that was coming through the pike. Now, the he was again been involved the NHL and Team Canada. You know, he's played several times at the Canada Cup and World Championship, but also was big on the executive side. So I want you to just think about 1973 for a second. Why people were spending so much money on people like possibility of Lanny McDonald, later Mike Pellick. It just seems to be something that everybody was trying to get into. Now, ironically, with this, ladies and gentlemen, the Cleveland took him 10th overall. Now, this was a high draft pick for the new franchise. But the native of Hanna, Alberta, I think he probably saw the fact he wanted to play with a Canadian team. And eventually, after being drafted, he really came on in these later seasons and became probably the most consistent scorer in Toronto history. He scored 37 goals or more in 4 consecutive seasons before going over to Colorado. Put some big numbers there, and of course, 83 and with the Flames, the big 66 goals and 98 points. Lanny McDonald, but the Bob Gainey situation too as well. Denis Potvin, Bob Gainey, Lanny McDonald, and we're going to go over quickly the number one picks, and I'll give you my general thought about them. Potvin, but Laziak went second in Atlanta. Ververgaard for Vancouver. Lanny McDonald. John Davidson in St. Louis, one of the most consistent goalies in the 1970s. Then Andre Savard, Blaine Stout, and Bob Gainey. Bob Daly, Bob Neely. Terry Richards, Detroit, another goalie. Morris Titanic. Darcy Roller, Rick Middleton, Ian Turnbull, and Vic Mercredi. And some of these players were underage, of course. Second round, Glenn Goldup, Blake Dunlop, Paulin Bordelot, Larry Goodenough, Eric Vale, Peter Morin, of course, the Montreal prospect, didn't do much. Wayne Bianchin, George Passat, John Rogers, Brent Levens, Colin Campbell, John Landry, Reggie Thomas, Pat Hickey, the future Toronto Maple Leaf, and Jimmy Jones. So technically, Toronto got the best of that draft because also Pat Hickey and Jimmy Jones ended up in Toronto. And with Lanny McDonald and Bob Neely and Ian Turnbull, again, I think Toronto really won that draft, in my personal opinion, for the players they drafted and the players they didn't draft. So, ladies and gentlemen, the 1970 NHL draft, I considered it a little bit weaker than a lot of people expected it because after the second round, we had 25 great players, but after that, there wasn't much, and that's just how it goes. But, I mean, any draft that has Gainey, Turnbull, and McDonald and Denis Potvin needs to be respected. But, again, there was a lot of players that weren't drafted that we'll talk about in future podcasts. So if you like what you're doing here with NHL draft recaps, let us know with a like, comment, subscribe, or share.